Now on this Tuesday evening, a full roundup of the day's international and national 5 news and weather.
Good evening, it's 7 o'clock. I'm Katie Ledger. These are the headlines. He slipped through the net. An inquiry asks how many more potential child killers are working with Britain's kids. A man is charged as an England fan is murdered in Lisbon. And the battle over the Britons being held in Tehran. More potential child killers could be working with kids because of failures in the way we screen the people who work with our children. That's one of the frightening conclusions of an inquiry into how child murderer Ian Huntley got work as a school caretaker at Soham Village College. Sir Michael Bichard, who conducted the inquiry, said he discovered errors, omissions, failures and shortcomings which were deeply shocking. He called for a national police intelligence sharing database as a matter of urgency and for a system of licensing anyone wanting to work with kids.
Sir Michael Bichard, the man charged with finding a sensible response to the senseless murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. There were a catalogue of blunders. Their killer, Ian Huntley, had been accused of attacking girls before in Grimsby, but the records were wiped by Humberside police. That didn't matter because Cambridgeshire police didn't check up on him, and on top of that, when he got his job at Soham Village College as caretaker, the school didn't check his references.
I've discovered errors, omissions, failures and shortcomings which are deeply shocking, and which meant that, for example, there was not one single occasion in all of the contacts with Huntley, including 8 sexual offence allegations notified to Humberside police, when the record systems worked properly. And that means that I can't be confident that it was Huntley alone who slipped through the net.
For nearly 2 years now, the people of Soham have struggled to come to terms with the tragedy that happened here. At least now is the chance for lessons to be learned. The first of Sir Michael Bichard's recommendations, the creation of a child care passport, a laminated photo ID card perhaps, that would show those who want to work with children have been thoroughly vetted. Secondly, a national intelligence database. Until now, the police have only shared information about convicted criminals, not those about whom there are grave suspicions. Sir Michael says that has to change. And lastly, schools trained to interview, to ensure that in any school there are staff trained in interviewing techniques. Sir Michael calls that the last line of defence.
No longer can the historic justification of operational independence take precedence over the imperative of being able to track and deal with offenders effectively.
The man who gave Ian Huntley his job told me these measures can work.
And these recommendations for training, for example, for people interviewing, I would certainly welcome. The move towards a more positive vetting system hopefully would also circumvent some of the many problems which seem to have occurred in this particular case.
But no resignations. Though Cambridgeshire police say they're trying to learn the lessons of what happened, Sir Michael Bichard reserved his gravest criticism for Humberside police. Ben Ando, 5 News.
So, as we've just been hearing, it was the force which failed to pick up on Ian Huntley's predatory nature that bore the brunt of Sir Michael Bichard's criticism. He concluded that there were very serious failings in the senior management of Humberside Police and that the Chief Constable, David Westwood, should take personal responsibility for that. Home Secretary David Blunkett immediately ordered the Humberside Police Authority to suspend Mr Westwood, but he's refusing to go, insisting he owes it to Holly and Jessica's parents to remain in charge of policing his region. Well, Ben Scotchbrook heard his public statement. Ben, a lot of people surprised that David Westwood didn't actually resign today.
Well, that's right, and that's because Sir Michael Bichard was so scathing about Humberside Police and its Chief Constable David Westwood. The report says that it was the failure of Humberside Police to record, retain and review intelligence that allowed Ian Huntley to turn up in Soham effectively with a clean sheet, despite the fact that he'd already been connected with 8 serious sex offence allegations. The report says that staff here hadn't been trained properly and didn't know how to handle intelligence effectively. And despite the fact that David Westwood only took on the role of Chief Constable in March 1999, it was the view of Sir Michael Bichard that Mr Westwood should take personal and corporate responsibility for a host of very serious findings. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, Mr Westwood's day got worse when the Home Secretary got to his feet in the House of Commons and invoked his legal right to call upon the Humberside Police Authority to suspend Mr Westwood. But when he gave a police press conference this afternoon, the Chief Constable said that he hadn't yet been suspended from his job, and until he was, then he would remain as Chief Constable.
I do not seek to detract at all from the strong terms used to describe those failings identified in the report. But what matters above all is that the lessons are learnt, that the actions are taken to ensure that nothing of this nature can happen again, and that the people of Humberside have an effective and committed police force to protect their freedoms. I have made a personal commitment to do my utmost to achieve these goals. I owe it to the officers and staff of Humberside Police, to the public of Humberside, and to the families of Holly and Jessica to complete this task.
Ben, how can Mr Westwood stay in place when he's been so sharply criticised today?
Well, he said this afternoon that he has the support of his police force and the police authority and the people of Humberside. But I have to tell him that when it comes to the people of Humberside, at least, opinion appears to be divided. When I spoke to a few of them earlier, we had half saying that he should stay and the other half saying that he should go. As for the police authority, and let's face it, it's their job to hire, fire, and in this case suspend its Chief Constable, I was told that they're going to meet before the end of the week, thus sending a message to the Home Secretary perhaps that yes, they take their responsibilities very seriously, but in their own time.
Thanks, Ben. Well, I spoke to Sir Michael Bichard and began by asking for his reaction to David Westwood's refusal to resign as Humberside Chief Constable.
Well, I don't think that's a matter for me to comment upon. I think it's a matter for Mr Westwood, for the police authority and ultimately for the Home Secretary. I produced the report. I hope the conclusions are clear. It's now for others to decide what to do.
Are you satisfied that he has taken personal responsibility for those failings that you identified?
Well, again, I think that's a matter for him. I have said that I think the failings post-1999 were not just corporate but were personal. And it is a matter for him to decide now what to do.
So you'd very much like to see him go ASAP?
No, I didn't say that. I have said all the way through the day that I have produced the report, I have produced the conclusions. It is not a matter for me to make any comment about Mr Westwood's future. That's a matter for him and the Home Secretary and the Police Authority.
Well, you talked about others slipping through the net. Can you actually feel confident there aren't more Ian Huntleys out there at the moment?
Well, I've also said during the day that I don't want to sensationalise this. On the other hand, I can't say that there are not other Ian Huntleys who have slipped through the net simply because there has been a hemorrhaging of intelligence. Intelligence has been lost without proper review. But as I say, I don't want to over-sensationalise that, nor can I guarantee that there aren't more Huntleys out there.
How confident can you be, or how much confidence can you give to parents that that the vetting procedures are now going to work?
Well, I think the vetting procedures have improved significantly in recent years, and the Criminal Records Bureau, although it had a difficult start, I think has contributed a great deal to that. I think there are still further improvements we can make, but I also think that even then the system will not be entirely satisfactory, which is why I'm suggesting a new registration scheme, which I think would give parents a great deal more reassurance.
Well, you suggested that childcare passports and a major overhaul of police intelligence systems. How can you make sure, though, that police don't store false information about people? What kind of safeguards are there going to be?
Yes, I'm not suggesting some new information gathering exercise. What I am suggesting is that we are better able to link the intelligence systems of the various police forces. I'm also actually building into the report recommendations which I think will give reassurance, because I'm making it easier for Her Majesty's Chief Inspector to inspect police forces and the way in which they do keep records. I'm making a recommendation that there should be a code of practice so that we have one system for how long you retain records. So I'm actually building in a number of safeguards, I think, for the public, whilst at the same time trying to ensure that we make better use of the intelligence that we do have.
Well, one MP has said that David Westwood was a scapegoat for failings that went much further, that the Home Office must also answer criticism. In your report you said that the inspectors of Constabulary had failed to identify the computer mess in Humberside or do anything about it until 2003. Aren't they to blame as well?
Well, I've criticised Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, and I've criticised the Association of Chief Police Officers. and I've criticised the Home Office for not getting in place a national IT system, although it was included in the national strategy back in 1994. I don't think people can say that I've only criticised Mr Westwood or Mr Lloyd or the two constabularies. I've criticised people who I think, and institutions where I think criticism is justified.
You say you'll review progress in 6 months' time. Realistically, what do you expect to have happened by then? I
do expect quite a lot to have happened by then. For example, we're coming to the end of the comprehensive spending review, the time when government allocates resources for the next 3 years. I'm hoping that by Christmas we will have a clear commitment to the money which is necessary to get this IT system, this national system, off the ground. That should be clear by Christmas. It should be clear that we're going to have in place some kind of interim system which at least enables us to know when a police force has intelligence on an individual. I think there's a great deal that we can do between now and just the other side of Christmas, but I'm going to make sure by coming back and having a look at it.
You've identified these lessons about children, but is there something more about the way that our police force actually works? What needs to change there?
Well, I think some people see this as a report which is suggesting we need a national police service, and I'm not suggesting that. What I think we do need to be clearer about is where do we need uniform national standards? For example, I think we only need one national standard for how long convictions are kept in different circumstances. So where do we need national standards, and where do we not? And where can we maintain local police standards and discretion? I think that's where we're not necessarily getting it right at the moment. I actually support local accountability and local policing, but I think we need to be clearer where do we need national standards and be a bit more ruthless in ensuring we get them.
Sir Michael Bichard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
An England fan was stabbed and killed when he chased after a pickpocket in the early hours of this morning. A Ukrainian man was arrested after 27-year-old Stephen Smith from Wolverhampton was stabbed just after 4 a.m. near Lisbon's central Rossio Square. The square is a gathering place for fans attending the European Soccer Championships.
A requiem for a fellow fan, an impromptu shrine for a fallen friend. Drained of their customary euphoria, supporters from England and other nations today gathered in Lisbon to pay tribute to a fellow football fan allegedly stabbed to death in an act of sudden street violence. 28-year-old Stephen Smith from Wolverhampton was attacked in this Lisbon street in the small hours of this morning while celebrating England's victory, an atrocity and aftermath witnessed by hundreds of bystanders.
I saw him trying to stop the bleeding, revive him. People taking photos of that, so people was getting them out of the way. So I just backed off and just waited for the ambulance to turn up. It took 10-15 minutes.
Portuguese police today confirmed they've arrested a 31-year-old Ukrainian man in connection with the killing.
Out of the blue, the Ukrainian citizen had I don't know the English word for this, maybe a knife, a razor. We call it navalha. And out of the blue, as I was saying, he stabbed one of the British citizens.
Just 2 hours earlier, England fans had been boisterously celebrating victory over Croatia in nearby Rossio Square, an evening packed with energy and enthusiasm and notably devoid of violence. Today those same fans appeared deflated and demoralised as news of the killing spread, words replaced by gestures.
We're out in the streets, sort of, celebrating, people even swapping shirts and all that. A lot of Dutch out as well, no trouble. Then you sort of get up this morning and hear about this.
It's perhaps particularly distressing that Stephen Smith should have been killed on the very day his fellow England fans did so much to win over the hearts and minds of the footballing world. Instead, England once again finds itself beset by violence and tragedy, though this time not as perpetrator, but as victim. John Gilbert, 5 News.
Well, England's footballers are resting today ahead of their quarter-final with host Portugal this Thursday. Live now to 5 sports reporter Andy Richardson. Andy, this morning's incident has rather overshadowed what should have been a big night of celebration for England fans.
That's right, events in Rossio Square really upsetting what should have just been a fantastic night for English football. There were around 40,000 English fans at the Stadium of Light here behind me for last night's game. They all had just one name on their lips. That, of course, was Wayne Rooney. Good price at the moment. He's out there in front on 4 goals, ahead even of Zinedine Zidane. Also a crucial goal last night for Paul Scholes. Now he'd been going through, he's up and running now, and so are England.
Good for him. Now, what's in store for England over the next few days?
Well, they're preparing now for this massive quarter-final against the host nation, Portugal. All sorts of fascinating confrontation. There's the god of Portuguese football, Luis Figo, up against the Real Madrid teammate, David Beckham. England keeping a low profile today, but they'll be back here training at the Stadium of Light tomorrow before the main event comes your way on Thursday.
Andy in Lisbon, thanks very much. Well, we want to know what you think about England's much-hyped boy wonder. This is today's 5 News Club poll. Is Wayne Rooney really the new Pelé? Well, to vote, you can call us 090 5020 5555 and answer yes or no. Your call costs 25 pence a minute, and there's also a chance to tell us your views. We'll bring you the final results in our update at the end of this evening, but here's a look at how the voting looks now. 51% of you think that yes, he is the new Pelé, but 49% of you say he's not, so fairly close. So the man of the moment is, without doubt, Wayne Rooney. Here's your message to the teenage football star.
My message to Rooney is keep your head, Rooney. Stay focused.
Wayne Rooney, good stuff, mate. Keep going, keep going. Get us to the final.
My message to Wayne Rooney is hello. It's your fault I'm not making no money, but listen, lad, go all the way. God bless you. We love you, England. Come on, England.
Rooney, you are sensational.
Your message to Wayne Rooney there. Now, there's confusion tonight over the fate of 8 British servicemen being held in Iran. It's not clear if they'll face trial or if a deal can be reached to free them. The Iranian ambassador was called to the Foreign Office today to discuss their position.
Tonight they are blindfolded and under guard in an Iranian prison cell. British diplomats had hoped the 8 servicemen would be set free within hours, but they're still in custody and their detention is developing into a major diplomatic crisis. The men, members of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines, were detained in the Shatt al-Arab, the waterway that leads from the city of Basra to the Sea of the Persian Gulf. It marks the international border between Iran and Iraq. The men were on board 3 small patrol craft when they were intercepted by Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Their weapons were seized. The Iranians have put on display all of their equipment and possessions. Radios, phones, watches, binoculars, GPS navigation equipment and night vision goggles are among the items which have been confiscated.
My name is Chief Petty Officer Robert Webster.
This evening, 2 of the British servicemen have appeared on Iranian television. They read out statements apologising for their actions.
I apologise, sir. I am sorry.
Coalition forces regularly patrol the Shatt al-Arab to try to prevent border violations and illegal smuggling. There's not been an incident like this before. Some British diplomats believe an internal power struggle in Tehran may be behind what's happening and that the hardline Revolutionary Guards may be flexing their muscles. Jack Straw has phoned Iran's Foreign Minister Kamal Karazi. The 2 men are known to get on well. However, Anglo-Iranian relations are strained at present. Britain says Iran is still building nuclear weapons at this secret plant, something Iran denies. It's possible that these British servicemen may be being used as pawns in a much bigger dispute. James Bayes, 5 News.
Other stories making the headlines today, and the leader of the Scottish National Party has resigned following the party's poor performance in the recent European elections. John Swinney faced widespread criticism within the party after only 2 MEPs were voted in. The SNP leader says he's going for the good of the party. He leaves his post in September. Police are re-examining nearly 120 murders which they believe could be so-called honour killings, like the case of 16-year-old Heshu Yunus, who was attacked by her father for being too westernised. Almost all the crimes have already been solved, but detectives hope by taking a fresh look at them, they'll be able to learn more about the problem. The husband of a woman whose dismembered body was found in a freezer has been arrested. 34-year-old Paul Dalton from Surrey was detained at Heathrow Airport. Tai Hui's remains were discovered in their family home in Kingston early this month. And Belgian child murderer and rapist Marc Dutroux has been sentenced to life in jail. He was found guilty of kidnapping and sexually assaulting 6 girls and of murdering 2 of them. The crimes shocked the country nearly 8 years ago. Iraqi militants have beheaded a South Korean man taken hostage last week. Arab television channel Al Jazeera broadcast the claim after receiving a videotape from a group linked to Al-Qaeda, which it says proves the execution took place. The South Korean Foreign Ministry confirmed Kim Sun-il had been killed. Council earlier refused demands to cancel its troop deployment to Iraq. 2 Palestinians have been shot dead by Israeli forces in the Gaza Strip. Eyewitnesses claim one of the men from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, a militant wing of Yasser Arafat's Fatah faction. The Israeli military say they opened fire on 2 armed men. Well, that's tonight's news from the Middle East, but there have been questions raised over how the media report it. A major academic study suggests television coverage leaves viewers confused and uncertain over the underlying causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, I spoke to Greg Philo from Glasgow University, co-author of Bad News from Israel, which examines media coverage and bias in TV reporting of the conflict. I began by asking him if he was surprised by his findings.
Well, they were a bit of a surprise, but not totally, because I'm a teacher and I teach in the university, so I wasn't altogether surprised that young people didn't know a great deal about the world. I was a bit surprised that people knew so little about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because we asked people, for example, who was occupying the occupied territories, and people were saying, well, they thought it was the Palestinians, and they seemed to have no real knowledge of the history of it or the origins of it. And we were, in the book, we were quoting Israeli historians saying that Palestinians had been driven out of their own homes and the land. So it did seem to us no secret, and yet nobody in the population, or many of the people in the population, seemed just not to know anything about it at all.
This has been a running story for 20 or 30 years on TV almost daily.
Yes, and yet people didn't know who was occupying the occupied territories. They thought that it was the Palestinians. They didn't know that the Palestinians had lost their water, for example. I mean, basic things that for example, the settlements, for example, people didn't know the nationality of the settlers. They didn't realise that the fact that the Palestinians were living under military rule meant that the Israelis controlled all the water supplies, and that the settlements were very green and very lush, while the Palestinian areas were very dry, and sort of basic sort of things like that. Now, it doesn't mean there's only one side in this conflict, and they didn't know very much about anything. So, I mean, obviously the Israelis would want to say, well, it's not altogether our fault, and we don't trust the Palestinians, or anyway, God gave us the land, or whatever. But it seemed to me that basically the arguments about what the conflict was about was simply not there. And the book, Bad News from Israel, sort of shows this extraordinary absence of public understanding.
You say that about 80% of the British population depend overwhelmingly on TV news for their understanding of Israeli-Palestinian disputes. Does it mean that TV news isn't doing its job properly, or it's just reporting day-to-day events and not putting it into some kind of historical context?
Yeah, I think it means it isn't doing its job right at all. I think one of the basic problems is that this is a very controversial area, so journalists tend to avoid it. I mean, but partly because they are concerned about the amount of controversy. There's a lot of hassle for journalists, to be honest. I mean, we spoke to journalists who talked about the extraordinary amounts of hate mail they got. If they said anything particularly against Israel, or that was seen to be against Israel,
even if they were just stating the facts.
Well, as they saw it, they were stating the facts, but I have to say, since I've put this book out, and I'm a sort of straight down the line social scientist, but I've had all kinds of people writing to me saying I'm a Nazi and all kinds of things, which is really quite extraordinary. I mean, it's such a contested area, it's such a difficult area.
So how do we actually do it? I mean, if you're talking about, can we do it in day-to-day news bulletins, or does it need to be explained in perhaps documentaries? The only problem with documentaries, there aren't so many on TV at the moment, and the audiences traditionally are very low for documentaries.
It has to be in the news programmes, because that is what people are watching. But what we found in the focus groups, and when we interviewed people, was that they actually wanted the information. They said to us, would you tell us why it's all happening? Because they said, for example, look, our children keep asking us about it, and we don't know. And it isn't hard. I mean, when we made the point about the water, that the Palestinians had lost the control of the water, and that the Israelis were using most of the water, people said to us, that's such an obvious point. Why don't we know that? Why does nobody know that?
But can you keep going through historical context every single day on every single story?
No, of course you can't. But I think what you can do is at least explain. I mean, if you use the word like occupied territories, and people simply understand it to mean that someone's on the land, that was why they thought the Palestinians were occupying, you see. You can say it's a military occupation, it's military rule. This is the consequences for it. You know, the Israelis say they've got to do it because God gave them the land. Palestinians say, you know, we don't want to live under military rule.
So you feel you can say it in a couple of short sentences?
Yes, it doesn't need to be a long historical explanation, but at least people then get a grasp of why all this is happening and something about it. And the difficulty is that it's so contentious, so stressed as an area, that journalists either avoid it or they tend, you know, our work tends to shows really that they tend to take the Israeli point of view quite often, certainly in BBC and ITN, and there's a sort of reluctance to say anything which is going to be too critical. We found, for example, Israeli casualties tended to be covered much more than Palestinian casualties. There's all those sorts of areas. But beyond that, there's a much more really important point.
I was going to say, I mean, your work was very based on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict,
Yes.
but this must apply to a whole range of stories, though.
It does, but the Israeli-Palestinian one is terribly important because people see that as an absolutely crucial thing for world peace. So in that sense, there has to be a public debate about it. But what we said in the book is you can't have a proper public debate unless people understand the origins, the causes, unless they understand the basic arguments. And what's happening is that if it's covered just as a succession of violent bombings, a succession of terrible, terrible events, it puts people off from having that kind of discussion.
Rick Farlow speaking to me earlier. Some tennis now, and it's day 2 of Wimbledon.
Here he is. Some tennis. Hope springs eternal when it comes to Tim Henman winning Wimbledon. The British #1 got a standing ovation when he arrived on centre court today for his opening match against Spain's Ruben Ramirez Hidalgo. Henman reached the semi-finals of the French Open. In his own words, he's playing the best tennis of his life. That was until this afternoon. The Spaniard ranked 89th in the world won the opening set 6-4 and gave Henman a runaround. Hidalgo, who had never played a competitive match on grass before, wombled all over the court to hit winners. The second set went to a tiebreak, and at last Henman was triumphant, 1 set apiece. He made it hard work, but Timothy Henman claimed the next 2 sets, 6-4, 6-2. Henman was victorious in a time of 3 hours and 2 minutes. If he's going to end Britain's 68-year wait for a homegrown men's Wimbledon champion, he'll have to pull his socks up.